evening. It's good to be with you tonight. A reading from the first chapter of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. Here ends the reading. Today I want to talk about incarnation. Incarnation is not just a Christmas story. One theological definition of incarnation is, the incarnation refers literally to the infleshing of the eternal Son of God, Jesus putting on flesh and blood and becoming fully human. The doctrine of incarnation claims that the eternal second person of the Trinity took on humanity in the person of Jesus of Nazareth. Great doctrine. But incarnation is more than just doctrine. It's about how we live, how we face troubles in our life, how we survive. We are Easter people. We live in the reality of sin, pain, torture, and viruses. And we are people who declare through our lives that God walks among us, and it makes all the difference. Tonight I'm mostly going to use the words of other people, two of the great ones, Kathleen Norris and Barbara Brown Taylor. Kathleen Norris, in her book Amazing Grace, writes, "For me, the incarnation is the place, if you will, where hope contends with fear. Not an antique doctrine at all, but reality, as ordinary as my everyday struggles with fears great and small, as exalted as the hope that allows me some measure of peace when I soldier on in the daily round." And Barbara Brown Taylor, "Whoever tied Easter to the spring equinox made a very good decision. For those who are so inclined, there is no better time for feeling alive, as the whole world wakes from winter and makes new birth look easy. Clumps of green grass erupt from flat, tan lawn. Bluebirds appear on the clothesline. There are so many red buds in the woods that a pink haze seems to waft through the trees. I may have blood instead of sap, but something inside of me rises once the earth rounds the winter bend and heads back in the sun's direction. This time of year my body knows things that my mind has not yet grasped, that the planting of potatoes or putting fresh hay in the hen's nest becomes a kind of prayer. I buried lily bulbs in the same earth that I buried my golden retriever just weeks ago. I pruned the crepe myrtles that my father never got around to before he became too weak to hold the shears. Whatever resurrection is all about, it has a physical dimension to it that 21st century believers are often too ready to ignore. From their first articulation of faith, early Christians spoke of the resurrection of the body, not only because some believed they'd seen the risen Christ in the flesh, but also because they believed God meant to raise their own flesh too. The God who made their bodies and declared them good would not have a change of heart on the last day. Wherever they were going with God, their bodies were going too. For any number of reasons, this bold hope has become too difficult for many to sustain. While Christians continue to confess the resurrection of the body in their historical creeds, most have a spiritual body in mind, which is superior to the earthly model in every way. This side of the grave flesh is needy, prone to injury, sluggish, and overweight. In Paul's language, it is sinful, the weak impediment to which the Spirit wills to do. Without tackling the metaphysics of resurrection or early Christian anthropology, I wonder what such flesh aversion says about our sense of incarnation. When I was first taught the concept, I was taught to capitalize it. The incarnation happened just once, in one person, a very long time ago. And Jesus alone was God's Word made flesh. As his follower, my job was to trust that it was true and to persuade others that it was true as well. The incarnation was presented to me as an article of faith. It was a unique event that involved Jesus and no one else, and the fate of my own flesh depended on my acceptance of that fact. Relatively late in life, I've decided that incarnation is less a doctrine than a practice, which Jesus did not come to do once for all, but to show any who are willing how God's word might become flesh in their own lives too. He said, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people. Give to anyone who begs from you. Consider the lilies, how they grow. And everything do to others as you would have them do to you." In sayings like these, Jesus gave his followers teachings they could embody. He taught them to take other people's bodies seriously as they took their own. He taught them to trust the revelatory power of lilies, vines, branches, sheep, falling stars, and birds of the air, among other things. He taught them to see God in the world the same way he did, in the way creation worked, in the way people acted. And while some of his examples are negative ones, you are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? He still spoke with full conviction that they could learn about God's realm by attending to their own physical lives on earth. To practice incarnation is to discover a pedagogy that is as old as the Gospels. Why else did Jesus spend his last night on earth teaching his disciples to wash feet and share supper? With all the conceptual truths in the universe at his disposal, he did not give them things to think about when he was gone. Instead, he gave them concrete things to do, specific ways of being in their bodies together that would go on teaching them what they needed to know when he was no longer around to teach them. After he was gone, they would still have God's word, but the word was going to need some new flesh. The disciples were going to need something warm and near that they could bump into on a regular basis. Something so real that they would not be able to intellectualize it, and so essentially untidy that there was no way they would ever gain control over it. So Jesus gave them things that they could get their hands on, things that would require them to get close enough to touch one another. In the case of the meal, he gave them fragrant things to sip and chew that they could pass to each other around the table. In the case of the feet, he gave them real dirt and calluses that they could use to enter one another's lives. For all our failure to honor them, our bodies remain God's best way of getting to us. To embrace the daily practice of incarnation is to walk the way of life that God opened to us in Jesus Christ, by showing us how to inhabit our own flesh as fully and faithfully as he did. When we are, by God's grace, able to follow a leader, even for an hour, then we too become God's Easter people, the latest bodily resurrections of God made flesh. So now, maybe especially now as we spend time away from one another, we're reminded of the power and gift of the Word made flesh. As we yearn for hugs or a hand to shake, we're reminded of the gift of community. During this time when we are fully aware of the shelter surrounding us, the food on our table, and the gift of clean air, may we remember and work for those who do not have the same protection and nurture of their bodies. Living incarnational lives is messy, painful, and unpredictable. It's also hopeful, generous, and rich. Amen. I'd like to close with a blessing. May the God of surprises delight you, inviting you to accept gifts yet not imagined. May the God of transformation call you, opening you to continual renewal. May the God of justice confront you, daring you to see the world through God's eyes. May the God of abundance affirm you, nudging you towards deeper trust. May the God of embrace hold you, encircling you in the hearth of God's home. May the God of hopefulness bless you, encouraging you in the fruits of faith. May the God of welcoming invite you, drawing you nearer to the fullness of God's expression in you. May God, who is present with you, awakening you to God in all things, all people, and all moments. May God be with you. Amen.